Marian Croning. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and meeting the Romanian readers via Zoom online. For those who don't know you and who don't know your novel, The 100 Years of Lenin and Margot, Litera Publishing House, în România, 100 de ani ai lui Lenin și Margot, editura Litera. Let me just briefly say that you study English and creative writing at Lancaster University before earning a PhD in applied linguistics at the Birmingham University, examining the link between language and humor in fiction. And you currently work as a lecturer in higher education. And in your free time, you perform improv comedy with a group comedy and name it Box of Frogs. So, Marian Croning, you're a novelist with a fresh and strong voice. Your novel is a success. I understand that will be also a film, and the film's rights have been acquired by Sony Pictures. So it's a news, it's extraordinary, congratulations. About the novel, the 100 Years of Lenin and Margot, let's go through a little bit in more detail about the story. The novel tells the story of a friendship between two extraordinary women, one young and one old, both terminally ill, who meet unexpectedly in the art class, and their friendship blossoms. Lenin, 70 years old, and Margot, 83 years old, realize that they have lived together for 100 years. With the help of Lenin's nurse and the gentle Father Arthur, the two friends determined to leave something everlasting behind. 100 paintings showcasing their 100 years. Hence, to celebrate century of living, Lenin and Margot decide to paint a picture for every year they have been alive. Each of the two is alone in the hospital. We talk about a terminal ward hospital. And I think it's a kind of similarity of their life stories, which aren't exactly happy. Each come from family that have had problems, breakups, illness, unhappiness, and even death. And personal, I was so moved by the beauty of this story. And a story which confronts life, death, and love with such poise and such humor. So the first question for you, Marian Croning, it's because it's a tough, it's a difficult, it's a sensitive and emotional subject. I ask you first if it was hard to write this novel.
Oh yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction. Yeah, it was. There were definitely times when I found myself, crying whilst I was writing. And my partner would come home and I'd be sort of tears streaming and he'd be like, what were you doing, what's wrong? And I'd be like, oh, I was just writing. And I think, yeah, absolutely, there, as you mentioned, there are some like darker themes, some sadder moments, and I'm quite an emotional person anyway, so I used to, when I was writing, I would listen to the saddest songs I could find and sort of have them playing whilst I was writing to kind of get me into that mindset. And I think one of the reasons that there's quite a few scenes of kind of like humor and lightness is because I wanted that balance between the sadness and the sort of like little bits of light as well.
So you said that Lenin came to visit you in your head, in your imagination, on a December night. And you said then that she taught me with what patience and perseverance means, and brought into my life a kind of magic. It seems like a personal story. And how was your personal meeting with the character of Lenin?
So yeah, when I started writing, I was doing my master's degree at Birmingham, and I'd been to the doctors for sort of just a checkup, and they found that my heart was beating way too fast. And so they sent me on to hospital, and so I was having heart tests and monitors, and I had to go to a lecture with a heart monitor kind of strapped to me. So I put a big scarf on so no one would notice. And I think while all these things were happening, you know, I was like at the hospital, and I was kind of paying attention to the things going on around me. And I was also kind of really questioning, like, what's going on? Like, I suddenly feel really vulnerable. Like, and I kind of got to thinking, what would it be like to know that you were going to die? And so Lenny's character kind of came out of that question and my own fear. So then when I was writing a master's essay, and it was so boring. And I just kind of had this sort of thought about the link between sort of the terminal at the airport and obviously the English word terminal for illness. And I just kind of immediately abandoned my work and started kind of writing. And it really felt like Lenny's voice was a reflection of my own fears and all the kind of the things I was bottling up that I was scared of that were happening at that time. So that's really how she came to me.
And what about the Margot character?
So Margot took a little bit more work, actually. I think partly because when I was writing, I was 22, and, you know, Margot's 83. So that's a big, you know, that's a big gap in terms of like life experience. And I think with Margot also, I wanted her to be a balancing character. So Lenny is kind of a firecracker. She's cheeky, she's irreverent, she likes to get into trouble. And Margot is a little bit calmer, a little bit more gentle. And so Margot kind of developed as the, like, not Lenny's opposite, but like a balance for her. And I really had to do my homework. You know, I had to research the Second World War, which obviously she lived through, and London in the 60s. And so kind of developing her character took a lot more work, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it.
Indeed, I often had the impression that Lenny is much more rational than Margot, and Margot often acts like a teenager. It's a rebel, open-hearted. And about this, do you think that loneliness in the face of death has united them and, you know, strengthened their friendship?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm always drawn as a reader to characters who are lonely. I find it so interesting to have a character who's sort of isolated by themselves. And one of the reasons that I sort of lent into a hospital setting is that often when we're in hospital, we are completely alone. You know, we've sort of, we're in our hospital gowns, and we don't have our, you know, our phones or our clothes or our friends and family. And so it's quite an isolating place. And so I thought it would be a really interesting sort of time for these characters to meet, because it's quite vulnerable being that lonely. And I think for Lenny and Margot, they're both people who, like you say, Margot's got a rebel heart. She's definitely young at heart. And I think they really find each other because they both haven't given up yet. They're both still, you know, very alive, full of energy, but they've got this sadness, this kind of loneliness about them. And I think they recognize in each other, oh, you're feeling like I am, you're alone too. And so that's what helps to build their connection.
But are these two characters, Lenny and Margot, are an alter ego of yours? And specifically, which of the two do you find yourself in more?
Yeah, I think, you know, I read a quote a while ago that said all fiction is self-reflection in some way. You know, like writers, we always, even if we don't mean to, we always sneak bits of our like personal lives and ourselves into our characters. And for me, Lenny is probably the character of the two of them that is the closest to me. She's a lot braver than I am, and she's a lot bolder. But she's a little bit like if you took my personality and multiplied her by 100 and then added in bravery and kind of confidence and cheekiness. And now that obviously the book's been released, a lot of my friends and family have started reading it, and so many of them have said to me, "Oh, I could hear you in some of Lenny's kind of cheeky dialogues." So yeah, I think Lenny is definitely more of a reflection of me than Margot, but there are probably still little bits that I've sort of implanted in Margot.
It's a reflection of you, but do you have you know, a favorite character while writing? Did you try to protect him, to give him more chances because it's your favorite character?
That's such an interesting question. I think I would love to say that I protected Lenny, but I think if anything, I just kept making things worse for her. And I think for me, when I was writing Lenny, I knew that she would respond to challenge and she would respond to people who ignore her in the most interesting way. So it was kind of fun to give her, there's a nurse that just can't, isn't a big fan of Lenny and doesn't always give her what she wants. And so for me, it was kind of fun to put those people in Lenny's way. I think for favourite characters would probably be Father Arthur, who is the hospital chaplain. And Lenny, obviously, as you know, comes to him with all of her big questions on life and religion and what's happening to her. And I think he's just he was really fun to write. He came really easily. And I really loved the kind of back and forth that the two of them ended up having.
I caught my attention to this character of Father Arthur with a specific delicacy and depth. Have you ever met someone like him? Where did you get your inspiration to create Father Arthur?
I would love to say I've met a priest like Father Arthur, but I haven't yet. He's actually based a little bit on a friend of mine who I met at university. And when we went to university, he was very, very religious, and I was a little bit more sort of agnostic, atheist, sort of trying to figure out what I believed in. And we had all these late night discussions about like what he believed and what I believed. And what was really interesting is that we weren't arguing or fighting. It was just this kind of dialogue of like, oh, you believe that? Okay. And what does this mean? And so Father Arthur developed from what I learned from my friend, which was that we could be friends, even though we had completely different worldviews, and we could still respect each other, even though we were coming from completely different places. And so Arthur was very much inspired by that. And I think he's just completely allows Lenny to be Lenny, and he lets her ask all these cheeky questions and he just lets her be herself. And I think that's one of the things that made him so fun to write, was because I've never met a priest like him. I mean, I'm sure there must be some, but it was almost like he would be my ideal for how I would love a religious leader to interact with someone like Lenny.
It's very beautiful what you say. It's time to meet someone like him. And about this, do you think that's a major difference in the mood you expect that finally when you're young or when you're old? Because I don't know where it's related to fear, to loneliness, to isolation. And in the moment we have someone with you or near us, it doesn't matter, in fact, how old you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that was fun about Lenny and Margot was that they are both have completely different ends of the age spectrum, but they're both facing this exact same thing. They're both facing death. And I think for me, as I've got older, I wouldn't say that I've got any less afraid of dying or, anything like that. And I think, for some people, obviously, as they age, they're like, I'm not afraid anymore. But I think for Lenny and Margot, they are both scared. And I think that's one of the reasons they latch onto each other, because, as we were saying, they're completely alone. And also, death is kind of a taboo subject. It's not something that we talk about a lot. It's not something that's like at the forefront of a lot of our minds. And so I think going through something like that often can isolate people a little bit further from friends and family who are well. So for Lenny, all of her school friends, they're not dealing with anything at all like what she's going through. And so it's one of the reasons she ends up, kind of drifting away from her friends, because they can't understand where she's coming from. Whereas Margot, even though she's so much older, sees that fear and is kind of like, I see you.
And I want to ask you, how much of the reality you've experienced or seen is on the page, and actually, where does the fiction begin?
That's such an interesting question. I think there are definitely sort of little snippets of things I've experienced in the book. And, as I was saying, when I was in the hospital, it was the little things that I sort of noticed. So like nurses celebrating a birthday and sort of jokes between doctors and, people shuffling around in their pajamas and those kind of things all informed it. And I think for me, the kind of the essence of the book is predominantly fiction, but that kind of experience of seeing hospital and kind of seeing it as like a living thing, like it's so big and it's got all these kind of tentacles and everybody's connected, and you know, Lenny will meet a person who's met another person and then she'll meet the next person, and there's all these kind of people connected to each other. But yeah, and there's lots of little experiences. So when Margot moves to the countryside, and she meets a man who's standing in the middle of the road, and she later goes on to have a relationship with him. And that was based on a real experience of mine. So I was driving in the countryside in England in the middle of the night, really dark, and this man just walked into the centre of the road and stood completely still. And I saw him and was like, oh my goodness, like slammed on my brakes, and he was dressed entirely in black, and then he just kind of stepped out of the way of the middle of the road, and I kind of carried on driving, and I was like, what was he doing? Why is he there? Like, what's he doing? And so that really stuck with me. And so when I was creating Humphrey, I wanted him to be a bit of an eccentric, and I immediately thought of that man in the road and the fear that I felt. And so I kind of put Margot into that situation and had her sort of go like, similar to me, be like, oh my goodness, there's a man in the road, what do I do? But then obviously I developed it more and, you know, tried to figure out why he'd be there. And the reason I came up with was that he's a stargazer and he's out looking at the night sky.
Did you know from the beginning the end of the novel, or was it reading along the way?
Yes, I always knew. I don't know, am I allowed to give spoilers or yeah, I always knew how it would end. Even though I kind of didn't want it to end that way, like I would have loved it to have like you know, perfect happy ending for everybody. But yeah, I always knew the way that it would end. And what was quite interesting was I was kind of at a point where I thought I was maybe sort of 10,000 words from the end, and I found myself sitting down to write Lenny's final scene, and it kind of took me by surprise, and that obviously made me cry. And I was kind of writing this and I was like, oh, I wish it could end differently, but I just feel like this is the truth of what happens to this character. And so at the end of the book, we have the book narrated by Margot. And again, I always knew that Margot would take over and sort of narrate the rest of the book. And I think it was really important for me to see Margot and how she feels, and like hear from her a little bit more directly before the book finishes.
And how did you long time take to write this novel?
So it took me 7 years from the first day I started writing to the final draft that went to the publishers, which is, you know, like a quarter of my life. So and I think there were definitely times during that process where I would leave it for a few months and then sort of not forget about it, but just be like, I need a little break, and then I'd sort of come back to it, and then I'd be like, there's so much work I need to do, and then I'd leave it alone for another month and just kind of, you know, I definitely lost faith in the process. You know, I thought like, this isn't publishable, no one's going to want to read this. But towards the end, I started to have like a little bit of hope that maybe I could find a literary agent and maybe people would want to read this. And so over those 7 years, the whole book changed dramatically. You know, the first draft was basically unreadable and really clunky. And then, you know, it was a process of working over, because the first draft came within about 6 months. And then the next 6.5 years was just me trying to shape this thing and to make it as good as it could be.
So you rewrote, you went back to certain phrases, you reread.
Yeah, absolutely. I about halfway through the 7 years, so around like 2016, I sent it out to literary agents in the UK looking for representation, and everybody rejected it. And they rejected it with really similar advice. And I thought to myself, these people know the industry better than anyone, you know, and they've all come back with really similar notes. And so I thought, right, I've got to do this. I've got to do this one more time. And so I basically took the whole book apart. I put all the Lenny chapters in one file. I put all the Margot chapters in another file, like completely deconstructed it, and then wrote sequentially separately, and then sort of brought them back together at the end. And that was one of the points where I you know, you mentioned, I said that Lenny gave me perseverance, and I think that was the lesson that I really took from that, was just to, like, even days when I'd look at Word and be like, I don't want to open my laptop, I want to watch Netflix, just sticking with it and being like, I've got to finish this, even if it's only for me who reads the book.
But I have a curiosity. What was the passage from the novel that you like it most about writing?
Ooh, I absolutely love the chapters in London. So when Margot moves to London, you know, so Margot's like spent her whole life doing like the right thing. You know, she's got married young, she has her young son, she's kind of doing everything sort of perfectly for the 1950s anyway. And then it all falls apart for her. And so, she, you know, when she moves to London, it's just this time of like freedom and self-expression and adventure. And I think those were lovely to write because it was nice to see Margot kind of crack open a little bit and be like, maybe I can learn to be happy, maybe I can invent myself. So yeah, I love writing those ones.
And in fact, who was the first writer of your novel? The agent, or who was the first?
The first readers were I have two younger sisters, and they both read it. And I printed it out on my on my printer and kind of stuck it in a folder. And both of my sisters, they're quite tough, and they both messaged me and said, like, one was in the library crying at university, and the other one was just crying up at night. And I think that was the first time I was like, oh my goodness, maybe there's something here, because it's made my sort of like tough sisters cry. And I thought, like, oh, maybe, you know, it gave me that little push, I think, to be like, you know, stick with it, because if it can make someone feel something, then maybe there's something to it.
It's amazing, because this is success. And what changed in your life, the publication of the novel? And I mean, how did you change you?
From the publication, yeah, it has completely changed my life. So just before the book was sent out to publishers, I was working 3 jobs in higher education in 3 different cities. So each morning I'd be going to a different city, and I was teaching and lecturing, and I couldn't find a permanent job. Everything I was doing was sort of temporary contracts for about 10 weeks, and then you move on and find another one. So getting the publication deal was just, I think it's still sinking in. You know, it just feels so incredible. And, you know, like I said, over 7 years, I completely lost faith in everything about it. You know, it could very easily have just lived under my bed for the rest of my life. And so hearing people who've read the book, you know, like the idea that people are reading it in Romania is just incredible. And, you know, it's just, I don't really have words for it. It's completely changed my life.
And how you manage this success?
Sorry?
How you manage this success? It's hard to manage a success.
Yeah, I think so. And I think just coming from, so my background is in academia, and pretty much everything you do there gets criticized, and you'll present at a conference and people will just ask you questions, and they'll be like, this is terrible, why are you doing this? And so I'm used to kind of having people read my writing and then give me a huge list of everything that's wrong with it and sort of tearing it to shreds. So I find it really hard to process when people are nice about my writing. Like, I kind of like, people have been sending me messages on Instagram and Twitter, and I kind of am like, oh, I don't know how to deal with this, because I'm just not used to it. And I think it's something I'm trying to still learn how to do. You know, it's a process.
And in this moment, I have 2 questions for you. And the first is, in which way helps your sweet black cat to write this novel?
Oh, he's so lovely. His name is Puffin. And we actually only got him in July of last year. So he came just after the book deals. And he's, because, you know, obviously we've been on lockdown, and he's been such a little ray of sunshine in our lives. And he likes to sleep under my desk. And if I don't give him enough attention, I'll get meowed at. Sometimes when I do interviews, you can hear him scratching at the door trying to get in. And I think there'll definitely be more cats in my future writing, because I'm kind of loving being a cat mum.
And the last question for you is, the moment that the reader you know, has finished the novel, you would like him to remain with the feeling that? What kind of feeling?
I think maybe a feeling that even though, you know, there are sad things, there's always moments of beauty to be found, even in the saddest of moments. And I think that's kind of what Lenny and Margot has meant for me. You know, they're in these really sad situations, but there's still moments of joy and happiness and laughter and beauty that come to them, even when everything around them is kind of getting quite scary and serious. So I think that would be what I'd hope people would take from it.
So, dear Marianne Kruining, you're an amazing writer, and a very gentle person. And if you want to transmit a message, something to the Romanian readers, it's time to do this.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. I'm just so thrilled that people are reading the book in Romania, and I'm so grateful. The cover is so beautiful. I cannot wait to get my hands on a cover. And yeah, just thank you so much for, you know, letting my two sort of characters into your hearts and into your lives. And I really hope that the book brings you something that you need, whether that's a giggle or whether that's a moment of just kind of cathartic weeping, or whether it's just a nice distraction from everything that's going on in the world at the moment. But my biggest message would just be thank you.
So the novel is also a lesson in the fact that it's not just what you do in life that matters. It's also who you share it with. And it's so how courage, curiosity, and an open heart can take you to unexpected places, even when it seems, you know, it's too late. A beautiful novel, and congratulations, Marianne Cronin. I think you will have many readers, and I wish you luck and all you want. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the lovely conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for reading.